It is a professional decision. Kaleb had climbed into his brand new combine harvester, was not there. Clarkson stepped up to the microphone. When it comes to Jeremy Clarkson's farming operation, a VIP summer party in full swing, 200 guests with pints of Hawkstone in hand, the Hawkstone Farmers Choir performing live for the first time, glass engraving stations, cider tasting, live music, everything Clarkson had planned for months, running exactly as it should. Except one thing. The man who was supposed to be hosting the cider tasting event was nowhere to be seen. Kaleb Cooper, the newly married farm manager of Diddley Squat, the man whose face appears on the latest Hawkstone television commercial, the man who 200 guests had partly come to see, looked out at the crowd and explained. At 8:30 that morning, harvest had begun at Diddley Squat, his own combine, purchased specifically for this season, and set off across the oat fields, the first time he had ever operated his own machine on his own farm. A significant day by any measure. By 8:45, the combine had broken down. 15 minutes. The machine lasted 15 minutes. And then, because this is Diddley Squat, and because the universe has a very specific sense of humour, a summer that had been relentlessly dry, going nowhere, Kaleb sent his apologies to the party, chose the exact morning of harvest to end its drought. It rained. The oats that Kaleb had been waiting to cut, that the whole operation had been building toward, were now soaked. Sitting in a waterlogged field, he was in a field in Oxfordshire, with a broken combine. There he was. Clarkson, to his credit, did not pretend none of this was happening. Then he finished his speech, introduced the choir, and drove back to the farm. This is what harvest looks like at Diddley Squat in the summer of 20. To understand why the combine breakdown matters beyond the comedy of it, you need to understand what Kaleb's new machine actually represents. For 4 years of Clarkson's farm, Kaleb Cooper has been operating farm equipment that belongs to either the farm itself or to his contracting business. A farm manager who does not own his own combine is entirely dependent on the availability of machinery he does not control. During peak harvest windows, which in British arable farming are narrow, weather-dependent, and entirely unforgiving, not having your own equipment is a genuine commercial liability. Kaleb's new combine is not a luxury purchase. The kind of decision a man who has built a contracting business from scratch, who understands the economics of farming better than almost anyone else on that show, makes when his business has reached the point where owning is smarter than borrowing. The fact that it broke down 15 minutes into its first ever use on the first morning of harvest is therefore not just funny. It is a very specifically Diddley Squat kind of disaster. The kind where the preparation was correct, the investment was sound, the planning was sensible, and the outcome was absolutely nothing like any of those things. Clarkson, standing on a stage at his own VIP party with a pint of Hawkstone, described the sequence of events to his guests with the weary resignation of a man who has spent 5 years learning that Diddley Squat operates on its own timeline and its own logic. "We began the harvest over at Diddley Squat this very morning," he told them. 8:30 am. Kaleb for the first time ever with his new combine doing the combining. 8:45 am. His combine broke down. He paused. The audience laughed. Then he delivered the next line, got the combine mended, and then, and this is true, for the first time in 4 months, it rained. The laughter that followed was the laughter of an audience that understands, perhaps more than they expected to when they bought tickets to a beer party, that British farming is essentially a sequence of events where preparation meets weather, and weather usually wins. 4 months without significant rainfall. A summer dry enough to create the exact conditions farmers need for a clean, efficient harvest. Moisture levels in the grain low enough to allow combining without the risk of spoilage. The window that British arable farmers spend all year waiting for, finally open. And then, on the morning of the first day of harvest, with the combine repaired and Kaleb back in position, it rained. To anyone who does not farm, this sounds like bad luck. To anyone who does, it sounds like British farming. The harvest window is not a reliable season. It is a negotiation between the farmer and the weather holds most of the cards. When it rains on cut or standing grain, the moisture content rises immediately. Combining wet grain risks damaging both the crop and the machine. The grain that goes into storage at elevated moisture levels will heat and spoil. So you stop, you wait, you watch the sky, and you check the moisture readings, and you calculate whether today is the day you can go back, or whether you are losing more of the window. At Diddley Squat, Clarkson confirmed that Kaleb was sitting in a field, waiting for the moisture levels to drop so that he can get cracking, not driving the combine, not harvesting, waiting, with a machine that had already broken once that morning, and a weather event that had ended a 4-month dry spell at the precise moment it was least welcome. Clarkson described the expected outcome for the season in one word: shocking. That word carries specific weight from a man who in previous seasons has watched crops fail, faced a bovine TB lockdown that stopped all cattle movement for 2 months, nearly died from heart disease before season 5, and then revealed aggressive prostate cancer to his farm manager and his viewing audience in the same breath. When Clarkson uses the word shocking about a harvest, he has a reference point for what shocking actually looks like. This harvest, he is saying, may be worse than most. Here is where this stops being a funny story about a broken combine and starts being something the farming industry is watching carefully. Clarkson said something in season 5 of Clarkson's Farm that this channel covered in detail at the time. He admitted, publicly, on the world's biggest streaming platform, that Diddley Squat Farm cannot survive without Amazon paying him to make television. The land loses money. The crops do not generate enough revenue to cover the costs of growing them. The TV show is not just entertainment that happens to feature a working farm. It is the financial instrument that keeps the agricultural operation alive. A bad harvest at Diddley Squat is therefore not simply a bad harvest. It is confirmation of the underlying economics that Clarkson himself has now acknowledged on camera. The oats sitting in a waterlogged field in Oxfordshire, waiting for moisture levels to drop, are not just oats. They are part of the calculation that determines whether the farm's numbers even get close to breaking even this year. What's also just emerged from looking at the full picture is that the harvest disaster has direct implications for Hawkstone Brewery. The barley and other grains grown at Diddley Squat and on farms within its supply network feed directly into the brewing operation. A bad harvest across the region means supply pressure on the raw ingredients that distinguish Hawkstone from industrial breweries that source globally on commodity markets. This is not theoretical. When Clarkson says the harvest looks shocking, he is describing a problem that sits upstream of the beer that 2,000 pubs across Britain are currently selling. The big breweries that Hawkstone competes with can absorb a bad British harvest by buying grain elsewhere. That is their model. Global sourcing, wherever the commodity price is lowest. No dependency on British weather, British seasons, British soil. Hawkstone's entire brand proposition is the opposite. Local sourcing, British barley, transparent supply chains, which means Hawkstone has a vulnerability that Carlsberg and AbInBev do not. When the British harvest is shocking, it costs them in a way that cannot simply be resolved by calling a grain merchant in Germany or Argentina. If you are enjoying this investigation, share this video right now. Not for the views, because every person who thinks Diddley Squat is just a television show about a funny man with a tractor needs to understand that the economics sits inside are real, urgent, and affecting farms across Britain right now. Hit share. Subscribe to Proper British Farming if you are new here. This is exactly what this channel exists to cover. Diddley Squat is not the only farm watching the sky this week. What's just emerged from the latest industry data is that British arable farming is entering harvest season 2026 in a significantly more fragile position 2025. 3 years running. Not a bad year followed by recovery. Each one arriving on top of the financial pressure after the energy price crisis that drove them up in the early 2020s. The minimum wage has increased, which is correct, but it adds to the cost base of farms that employ labour at harvest time. And the price that farmers receive at the farm gate for what they grow has not kept pace with any of these input increases. The October 2024 budget introduced changes to agricultural property relief that have added inheritance tax liability to farms previously structured around the assumption that the relief would be permanent. Families who have farmed the same land for generations are now navigating a tax position that did not exist 2 years ago, while simultaneously managing a third consecutive below-average harvest year. This is the context in which Kaleb Cooper's combine broke down at 8:45 on a Tuesday morning in July. It is funny. It is also a very specific illustration of what farming in Britain in 2026 actually looks like. Control. The harvest window that was supposed to be the payoff for a difficult season. The weather that arrived at the worst possible moment. A vision deal to absorb the impact. There is a brewery generating 21 million in annual turnover. There is a pub with 140 food operation loses. Clarkson has the financial architecture around. There is no brewery. There is just a field and a bank statement. Here is the detail that landed hardest on the audience at the Hawkstone VIP summer party, and the one that deserves more attention than it has received. Clarkson did not stay at the party. He made the announcement about what was happening at Diddley Squat. He introduced the Hawkstone Farmers Choir, the same choir whose operatic version of F Me It's Good was banned from television and watched by 500,000 people on Instagram in 24 hours, now performing live for the first time. He watched them perform. And then he left. He drove back to the farm. To be there, to help with the harvest that was stuck in a wet field, with a combine that had already broken once. Put that in the context of where Clarkson is physically right now. He revealed aggressive prostate cancer in the season 5 finale. Surgery followed, with complications. His closing words to the camera from a hospital bed were, "If this is all successful, I'll see you for season 6, and if it isn't, I won't." He has since confirmed he is in remission. The blood tests came back clear. This is a 66-year-old man who was recently operated on for cancer, who works against medical advice when the situation demands it, who left his own commercial event, an event with 200 guests, live entertainment, and a packed schedule, to drive to a field in Oxfordshire because the harvest needed doing and Kaleb needed help. That decision tells you something about what Diddley Squat actually is beneath the television show and the brewery and the pub. It is a working farm, with harvest windows that do not care about your VIP party schedule or your post-operative recovery plan, or the choir you hired specifically for this occasion. The oats need to come in when the oats can come in, and everything else waits. They worked through the night. Clarkson's parting words to the party before he left were entirely characteristic. "For real, this year I have to get back. I do apologize. We're going to be going through the night to get the oats in." Then, he was gone. Season 6 of Clarkson's Farm has been confirmed by Amazon, with production expected in 2027. Whatever happens with this harvest, however many nights they work, however many times the moisture levels fail to drop to where they need to be, it will almost certainly end up on screen. That is both the particular genius and the particular irony of Diddley Squat as a business. The worse the harvest, the better the television. The more things break, the more compelling the series. The shocking year that Clarkson is predicting is not just a financial problem for the farm. It is probably content for the show that helps pay for the farm. Kaleb, meanwhile, is preparing for something that no previous harvest season has included. Kaleb, Down Under begins filming this autumn. His first ever solo Amazon series. His first ever flight. A few months ago, he was a 26-year-old who had barely left Chipping Norton. He is now a 27-year-old, married 3 weeks ago, father of 3, whose brand new combine broke down 15 minutes into the first harvest of his married life, and who will spend the next several months in Australia being filmed by a camera crew on the other side of the world. Somewhere between the combine breaking down and the moisture levels dropping and the overnight oat harvest, the newly married Mr. Cooper will have had time to reflect on how significantly his life has changed since he first climbed onto a tractor at Diddley Squat for a TV show nobody was quite sure would work. From 50 pence an hour to a broken combine, a wife, 3 kids, and an Australian adventure. In roughly 5 years. That is not a bad trajectory, even on a shocking harvest year. Here is what the sequence of events on that morning reveals that the coverage of the party itself missed. The Hawkstone VIP summer party was a genuine milestone. The choir that the ASA banned from television performing live for the first time. A commercial event that shows how far the brewery brand has travelled from the shed full of unwanted barley it started in. A summer party that 200 people paid to attend because they wanted to be close to something that has become genuinely important in British food and farming culture. And the man who built it was not there for most of it, because 15 miles away a combine had broken down and the oats needed to come in. That tension between the empire Clarkson has built around the farm and the farm itself, which remains as difficult and weather-dependent and mechanically unpredictable as it has always been, is the real story of Diddley Squat in 2026. The brewery is 75 million. The pub employs 146 people. The merchandise division generates tens of millions. The television show has made both Clarkson and Kaleb famous on 4 continents. And the harvest is shocking. The combine lasted 15 minutes. The rain came back after 4 months specifically to ruin the first morning. Clarkson left his own party to drive a tractor through the night. That is not a television show. That is a farm. And farms do not care how successful the brewery is, or how many people attended the VIP party, or whether the choir got a standing ovation. They just need the oats in. Drop what do you think in the comments if you think this harvest story will end up in Season 6. Tell us where you are watching from. And tell us what we should investigate next. See you in the next one. Picture the scene. The farmer's dog waiting for moisture levels to drop, and 200 guests 30 miles away wondering where. For the first time in 4 months.